Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 1993, or at least the ones that I've seen. And I can now reveal I have seen 33 films from this particular year. I'm only going to be ranking my top 25 though, otherwise I'll be here all day. It's still going to be a long video. If you want to know what the 8 films are that didn't make the cut, I will tell you. Some of these aren't bad films, I just don't remember them that well, and I've never really had the interest to go back to them. So here they are. We've got Indecent Proposal, Another Stakeout, that's a genuinely bad film, The Piano, Striking Distance, that's a Bruce Willis film from the 90s. I absolutely remember renting that and watching it, but I remember nothing about it, literally nothing. A Bronx Tale, California, The Real McCoy, and Robin Hood, Men in Tights. So those are the 8 films which didn't make the cut. So let's crack on and talk about the 25 films which did make it into the main ranking. But first, a quick reminder that the top 2 films today will go through to the eventual grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. We will one day get to that grand final, I assure you. But for now, let's concentrate on 1993 and find out what is my 25th favourite film from this year. So first up, we have the closing chapter in the original Robocop trilogy, but this one was nowhere near as good as the first 2. I mean, Robocop 1 and 2 really captured my imagination as a kid. The third one left me a bit disappointed, to be honest. It's still watchable, but it certainly sticks out like a sore thumb compared to the first 2. Part of the problem is that they toned the violence down. I think they were going for like a 12 or a 15 certificate this time around. I get why they did that, but it just doesn't work. Part of the charm of the first 2 Robocops was the over-the-top violence. Also the satire, which is not in this film as much. The frustrating thing is they had a good story. You know, this idea of OCP pulling down houses, it's not something that they just conjured out of thin air to make another sequel. This was the culmination of certain events that we'd seen in the first 2 Robocops, so this should have been a great concluding chapter to the trilogy, and it just wasn't. I mean, look at the villains. In the first 2 films we had these amazingly scary villains, Bodica and Kane. This time we get Japanese robots. I don't even mind the fact that they've replaced Peter Weller with somebody different. I think the new guy's name was Robert Burke. He wasn't bad at all, in my opinion, but the overall film is just a real letdown, really. So, Robocop 3, 25th today. This is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel, in my opinion, one of his very best novels, at least of the ones that I've read. I think he did it about halfway through his career. This film, though, is not the most ideal adaptation of his works, because it's one of those situations where the book is just too big to be properly turned into a 90-minute movie, a 2-hour movie. You've got some quality actors here giving it their best, Ed Harris, Bonnie Bedelia, but the whole film is just so diluted. I think unless you're a fan of the novel, I probably wouldn't watch it. Off the top of my head, there are 3 Christopher Lambert films from his heyday that I really value. One of them is Highlander, everybody likes that one. There's this one, Fortress, and then there's a film called The Hunted. I can't remember if we've gone past that yet in this ranking series. Fortress is about a guy who gets sent to this futuristic prison and he's got to try and get out. It's pretty good, although I haven't seen it for quite a long time now. I'm sort of permanently waiting for it to become free on one of my streaming platforms. I'm a bit of a tight bastard when it comes to paying to rent stuff on things like Amazon Prime and Sky. It's weird how my mind works. The other day I spent £17 buying a Blu-ray for a film that I already owned on DVD, but when it comes to spending just like £4 to rent a movie that I know I'd have a good time with and get a lot of nostalgia out of, I'm kind of like, ugh, I don't want to do that, so I don't get to keep it afterwards. You know, I don't know, it's just one of those things, but Fortress is a good movie from what I can remember. Let's just leave it at that. Another one I don't remember that well. What I do remember, though, is how gorgeous Rebecca De Mornay was back in the 90s. That is probably this film's trump card today in terms of guaranteeing it a place on the list and not on the scrap heap list of films which didn't make it on. I don't know why Rebecca De Mornay did not make it big in Hollywood ultimately. I guess she just didn't quite have that breakout hit which would have turned her into an A-lister. What I do remember about this film is that it was some sort of thriller where Don Johnson was being really nasty to whoever Rebecca De Mornay was playing, and they ended up having some kind of fight at the end where they fell off a balcony, and I think Don Johnson cushioned Rebecca De Mornay's fall, which meant that he died and she lived. That's what I remember anyway. I've not seen it since the 90s. I think these days it would be considered to be more of a TV movie sort of thing, something that would be a Netflix exclusive, say, and not getting a cinematic release. But there we go. This movie means diddly shit to me, but I did have a good experience of watching it at the cinema. So I would have been about 13 at the time, and I got invited to go and see it with my older cousin and his friends. They were all about 20, 21, so as a youngster getting to hang out with the adults, it was a pretty cool experience. We couldn't even see the movie in our hometown because this was back in the days when there weren't that many multiplexes around. A lot of towns just had a small cinema with maybe one or two screens, and they would regularly get full. So if you wanted to see a movie, sometimes you just have to drive to another town. Literally, that's the way it was. And this was one of those occasions. So we had to drive about half an hour in the dark to another town. We got in to see this film, and I had a good time just for the fact that I was out with these guys, but the actual movie itself wasn't that good. We also had to sit on the front row because there were no seats left. This has only happened to me twice in my lifetime that I've had to sit on the front row in a cinema screening. It's not much fun. You're like this, just looking up at the movie. It's not the ideal way to watch a film. I think the other time it happened to me was Avatar, but that film was so good I forgot where I was sat after 10 minutes. Not the case with Wayne's World 2. So I look back on this whole experience with a little bit of nostalgia just because of who I was with, and, you know, the night in question felt cool to me, but the movie itself, I'm not interested in Wayne's World. If you followed this series a while, you'll know that I don't watch that many comedy films. This is an exception. I've seen Cool Runnings once, possibly twice. I can remember several of the jokes, though, even now. I'm just slightly sad that they didn't get to win the gold medal at the end of this film. They've gone for the Rocky 1 sort of ending instead, but I wanted to see them go back home as heroes, you know, get the big welcome parade and stuff. I'm probably not the only person who, if I had to sit down and watch bobsleighing on the TV now, I'd probably cheer on Jamaica, even over the UK. But yeah, Cool Runnings is a good film. I vividly remember when this came out. I was in the queue at the cinema for Jurassic Park, and there was a massive billboard for Last Action Hero right next to me where I was queuing, and I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad I'm here for this and not that. I was at an age back then, 12, 13, where I was wanting to get into really serious adult movies because I wanted to make that next step into being an adult myself, you know, and watching a more light-hearted Arnie caper just wasn't part of my agenda around about that time. I was much more into things like Total Recall, where villains get their arms cut off on elevators and stuff like that. So even when I watched Last Action Hero about 6 months later on a rental, I still didn't think that much of it, but I like it much more today. I think it's a much better film than it was reviewed at the time. It's still not one of my favourite Arnie films, but I've got a lot of respect for it, but I'm still glad I went to see Jurassic Park. Possibly the weakest of the Maniac Cop trilogy, but it's not as bad a third entry as, say, Robocop 3. This is still a fun time for me. I don't understand why people would beat on it because it's not as good as number 2. The fact that Robert Davi comes back gives it a lot of credibility. There are a lot of fun moments in it. You know, the bit where Cordell grabs this guy, throws him in the air, and just blasts him out of the sky like an old gunslinger in a western shooting a hat in the middle of a high street or something. And then there's the part where Robert Davi gets on a gurney and rolls himself down this hospital corridor, just blasting villains. It's really good stuff. But the thing that lets this film down is that there's a massive plot hole. Well, not really a plot hole, just a completely stupid and unbelievable thing. There's like a magical tunnel under the ground which conveniently links two locations in this movie, and it's just silly when you think about it. I go into more detail about this in my Maniac Cop 3 review, which I did a long time ago now. I've got a little playlist just for my 3 Maniac Cop reviews if you're interested, but I quite like this film. It's a fun little concluding chapter to the trilogy. This is one which might have come higher, but for the fact I've not seen it in probably 15 years. When I first saw it, I thought it was awesome, and I ended up watching it about 3 times in the space of a year. It's a very witty film, as you would expect, being written by Quentin Tarantino. It's got a very deep cast. I mean, there's so many famous people in this film who just come in and do 1 or 2 scenes. My favourite cameo is the one by Christopher Walken where he interrogates Dennis Hopper's character in a caravan. That is such an amazing scene. I don't fully buy into the romance angle in the story, but there's so much great stuff to enjoy in this. I also like Gary Oldman's segment near the start where he's like, "Is it White Boy Day?" "No, it definitely isn't White Boy Day, boss." It's a great script, this film, and I think I might have done it a little bit of disservice actually putting it this low, but it wouldn't have made the grand final wherever I put it, I don't think so. I'm going to hang on to that thought. So in the previous rankings video that I did, 1992, we had Passenger 57, which is a very cheesy action film. Boiling Point is Wesley Snipes doing a more slow burn thriller, and in terms of which do I prefer, it would entirely depend on my mood. What sold me on this film back in the day was the trailer. The trailer was pretty awesome from what I can remember. I always used to watch trailers on the front of VHS rentals. It was just something that I did. You know, there was no internet back then, so you had to sort of watch the trailers to get ideas for other films that you'd want to watch. These days, I still see some DVDs put trailers on the front of their films, and it just pisses me off these days because I'm like, what are you doing? I've got the internet for this stuff these days. I don't need you to put trailers on DVDs and Blu-rays. But getting back to Boiling Point, it's got some great performances, great characters. Wesley Snipes puts in a genuinely good display in this. I really like Dennis Hopper's villain as well. He's very charismatic. I like Viggo Mortensen's villain as well. This was probably the first I ever saw of him as an actor. And it's such a small thing, but I love the suit that he wears in the scene where he dies. He's got this really gaudy yellow suit, and I just want that suit. I'd love to go clubbing in that, even if it would mean getting shot by Wesley Snipes. Another Wesley Snipes vehicle, he was very prolific at around about this time. He was churning out lots of decent movies. This is another one. I think I just about preferred this to Boiling Point, mainly because of the Japan setting. There was another film that was quite similar called Black Rain, starring Michael Douglas, which I liked for sort of the same reasons. And putting Snipes with Sean Connery was quite an interesting move. They work very well together, I think. They're not a funny sort of partnership. It's just that contrast in acting styles which is quite unique for this movie. So Rising Sun, another film I really need to go back and watch at some point. This for me is almost like the unofficial 6th Dirty Harry film. It does feel like Eastwood's playing the same character here, and I could easily believe that the government after the Deadpool would recruit Harry Callahan to go and be a protector for the president, just because they would have seen how good he was in, you know, killing all those bad guys in the first 5 Dirty Harry films. So this film was very memorable for John Malkovich's turn as the villain. He had that little plastic gun thing that he designed in his own garage. That was pretty cool. Rene Russo's in the movie. She has a crush on Eastwood's character, even though Rene Russo was probably early 40s when she did this, and Eastwood was in his like mid 60s. But for some reason, that doesn't bother me as much as Rene Russo's romance with Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon 3. That just felt really off somehow. I could sort of accept this one more, this attraction. But yeah, In the Line of Fire is a good thriller, and it's got a really exciting ending when Eastwood sort of dives like a goalkeeper to save the president. Like, what a save! Gordon Banks. It's yeah, I like In the Line of Fire. This was one of my favourite action films back in the 90s. In fact, for Christmas '93, My dad got me this and Demolition Man on VHS, and he put them both together in the same parcel, so it was like a double bill of Stallone. I'd seen both movies before, I knew what I was getting, but I think I preferred Cliffhanger back then. I watched that first out of the two on Christmas night or the night after, and I think I watched Demolition Man a few nights further on. But these days, I think I prefer Demolition Man. I think there's more to it. I think other action films in the modern day have displaced things like Cliffhanger, but it's still a really good film if you go back to it. John Lithgow's villain always cracked me up. I think he was English or pretending to be English. I don't think we need two guides. Retire him when he comes down. It's still a great film. For a lot of Jason fans, this is their least favourite film in the franchise. I'm not in that camp. The last time I did a Friday the 13th ranking, I put this one 7th out of 12, which probably makes me one of the biggest fans of it in the world. I think it's the body swapping aspect, which a lot of people have a problem with, but I don't mind it. I mean, this is part 9, do something different. If you judge this film purely as a horror film and not on your expectations as to what a Friday the 13th should be, I think there's a lot to enjoy here. It's a very, very well-made film, actually. Lots of good action sequences. It almost feels like the Jason version of Terminator at times, the way that he barges into the police station and the diner, and he's just acting like Arnie from the first Terminator film. It's got one of the best kills in the franchise, this film, the tent kill, at least if you watch the uncut version. So, yeah, I've got a lot of time for Jason Goes to Hell. This is a film about a guy who just snaps one day in the middle of a traffic jam, gets out of his car, and then sets off on this journey across LA to reunite with his wife and daughter who left him quite some time ago. There's quite a serious message behind this film about men who get into their 40s and 50s and they don't feel needed by their families anymore, don't feel needed by their workplaces. Obsolete is the word that Michael Douglas's character uses to describe himself in this film. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got this character played by Robert Duvall, a cop who perhaps feels a bit too needed by his wife to the point where she's trying to persuade him to take early retirement, even though he doesn't want to retire. But all of this stuff sort of gets lost when you discuss this movie with anybody, because the likelihood is all you're going to talk about are the funny scenes, and there are loads of them in this film. The most notable of all is probably when Douglas goes into this burger joint and holds up this burger that's like that thin, and on the picture though it was like that big, so he puts in a complaint and holds the whole restaurant at gunpoint. It's really funny, and there are several other great scenes like this throughout. This is probably one of my favourite ever Michael Douglas performances, and it's also one of the only times I can ever remember seeing Rachel Ticotin in another movie other than Total Recall. Alive is about a group of rugby players whose small plane crash lands in the Andes, that sort of neck of the woods, Peru. And what makes this film even more fascinating than it already would be is the fact that it was based on a true story. So these guys have got to sort of pull together and decide how best to use their remaining rations, how they should maybe try to get off the mountain. What they could really do with is Sylvester Stallone's Gabe character from Cliffhanger, but they don't have him, so they've just got to kind of make do with the people they do have. I think the most notable scene in this is when the characters come to the realization that they're going to have to feed on the bodies of their dead friends and relatives. I don't think this is as gross as the film wants us to think it is, though. I mean, it's very easy to turn your nose up when you're sat in your living room watching this film, when you've got loads of great food in your fridge 10 yards away. But if I was actually there, freezing my arse off on a mountain, and I had a big hole in my stomach because I had no food in it, those dead bodies would probably look very tasty to me, just saying. So here we are at Demolition Man then, which I was talking about a little bit earlier, and I promised myself that when I got to this one, I would raise the question of how the hell do the three seashells work? I reckon there has probably been at least one person over the past 25 years who has actually gone to a beach, grabbed a bunch of seashells, taken them home, and tried to wipe their arse with them, but I'll be damned if I can figure out how that would work. So I suspect that it's just complete writer's bullshit. I also like the thing in this where characters get fined if they swear. There's a little machine on the wall that says, "John Spartan, you're fined 1 credit for a violation." And he gets fined like 7 credits in the space of 60 seconds at one point. And there's another funny scene I've got to mention when Sandra Bullock and Sylvester Stallone have sex telepathically. That's just not going to work for a guy, is it? So there's lots of fun stuff in this movie. The action side of it is a little bit average. I mean, this is built up to be a Stallone versus Snipes sort of deal, but that just takes the tension out of any of their fighting scenes in the sort of early to middle part of the movie, because you know that they're going to make it to the end to have one last battle, and even then you know that Stallone's going to win. But on the whole, I still really like this movie. It is a fucking good time. Oh, I've just got to find one credit. In my opinion, this is one of Jean-Claude Van Damme's very best movies that he's ever done. I don't know why I'm carrying a empty cling film stick all of a sudden. It was just lying around. But yeah, a friend of mine told me about this when I was at high school. I went round to his house and watched it one evening, and at the end I was like, yeah, you were absolutely right, mate. That was an absolutely banging movie. It's not just Van Damme that makes this awesome, though. It's the villains as well. Lance Henriksen, in probably one of the roles of his career, plays this brilliant bad guy. And his second in command is great as well. I think it's an actor called Arnold Vosloo. He was the guy who went on to play the Mummy. He gets so many great lines, like when he cuts this cop's ear off and he's like, I come back here, I'm going to cut me a steak. So yeah, Hard Target is brilliant. Apparently there's an extended cut, but I don't think it's available in my region. The one time that I tried to sort of search for it. But I can't imagine that John Woo would have left that much on the cutting room floor that was actually any kind of great action. It's probably like a few little romance inserts in the middle of the film, I imagine. I don't know, you'd have to let me know. But Hard Target, brilliant action film, and it makes my top 10 today. My relationship with this film didn't get off to the best of starts. If you're old enough to remember when this film came out, then you'll know that it was massive. I mean, on a scale of like Avengers Endgame massive. Everybody was talking about it, everybody wanted to see it. I was in that boat too, but I was disappointed when I came out of the cinema. It was a bit too much of a family-orientated film for me, and at that age, 12, 13, I was a little bit snooty at the time in terms of what I wanted from a film. I was just interested in serious stuff, adult films. I watched it again like 10, 15 years later, and I couldn't believe I was watching the same film. I'd definitely matured, I think. I looked at films a completely different way. I enjoyed films a different way, and I had a completely different experience to the point of suddenly becoming a fan of the franchise when I never had before. There is one thing that still bugs me about the original Jurassic Park, which is why it's only come 7th today and not scared the top 2 or 3, which it might well have done, but for this one thing. The thing that I cannot stand, even now with this, is the theme tune. It drives me potty. I don't like it. I've never liked it. It's all the way through this film, and it's just bad, like really bad. I wish I could have a version of this film where the theme tune was taken out, and then this really would be a masterpiece of Tyrannosaurus Rex proportions. As it is, still a really good film, though. Groundhog Day is one of the funniest comedies I've ever seen. Bill Murray is just absolutely amazing. So I am going to put it 6th. Groundhog Day is just the most awesome film. Bill Murray is so funny in this, it's unreal. So for my money, it definitely deserves to be 6th today. Groundhog Day is fantastic. I would say it's one of the funniest comedies I've ever seen, in all honesty. And I can proudly now declare that it's my 6th favourite film today. Groundhog Day, 6th. Groundhog Day is the frigging dog's bollocks. Bill Murray, has he ever been better than in this movie? I know he's good in Ghostbusters, but in this movie he really reaches a new zenith for me. So I would say that Groundhog Day is my 6th favourite film from 1993. 6th or 7th. Groundhog Day is I'm not going to say too much about it. It kind of feels like one of those films that has just been talked to death before. So I'll just say right here and now, 6th. Number 6 in today's ranking is going to be cold, it's going to be dark, and it's going to last you the rest of your life. 6th, Groundhog Day. I want a hard target search of every residence, gas station, farmhouse, outhouse, doghouse, and henhouse. In this area, your fugitive's name is Dr. Richard Kimball. Go get him, boys! This is one I had a much better experience with at the cinema than Jurassic Park. It's really high tension stuff. I particularly love the scene at the dam. It's a little bit unrealistic that he could make that jump and survive, I suppose. But all the way through this, I constantly thought that he might get caught and then escape at some point later. So it's real edge of your seat stuff. Harrison Ford puts in a great performance. Tommy Lee Jones is brilliant as well. He finds a good balance between hard-edged cop who really wants to do his job and a guy who is keeping an open mind that Kimball might not be this evil person that the news reports are making him out to be. I've never seen the sequel, US Marshals. You'd have to tell me if that's any good. I guess it must be at least worth one watch if it's got Tommy Lee Jones and Wesley Snipes in it, though. This is a very bleak film if you know what it's about, although it is sort of uplifting right at the end when you see all those people walking through the graveyard and you've got that coming together of human spirit. But for the most part, it is quite a depressing watch. I seem to remember enjoying the first half slightly more than the second half. It's not that the quality dips. I think the film and the story just sort of grind you down after a while. This is a 3-hour watch and it is tough at times. It was a very low point in human history, I guess. I wouldn't call it one of my favourite films, but it's certainly one that I really respect. And if I reviewed these sorts of movies, I would absolutely give this one 5 out of 5. But I'm sort of glad it's not going through to the grand final. I would have put it through if the 3 films above it had not existed, certainly. But I think it's just one of those sort of films that I just want to talk about once, really. But full credit to Liam Neeson for taking on this role. He is really good in this. Although I do sort of wish that he'd called up Hitler and done his Taken line, you know, I will find you and I'll kill you. World War Taken, the spin-off, that would be pretty cool. So here we have another Stephen King adaptation, but this one is much better than Needful Things, and the main reason for that is because it's a TV movie, it's 3 hours long, it can take its time and adapt the novel properly, whereas Needful Things just completely half-arsed the novel because it was trying to squeeze so much stuff into like 90 minutes, 120 minutes, just didn't work. Tommyknockers has a lot more freedom. It's a very atmospheric story. It feels very green. You'll know what I mean if you've seen it. I like the 2 leads, Mark Helgenberger and I forget the name of the other guy. He was in NYPD Blue and more recently Star Wars. But yeah, I guess I would call this better than Schindler's List, as bizarre as that sounds. I had this on like a taped version from the TV back when I was younger, and more recently I've bought a DVD. I did that about a year ago. Had a lot of fun watching it for the first time in forever. The first qualifier for the grand final today is Judgment Night, probably one of the lesser known films to qualify, but this film is absolutely awesome. It is, in all likelihood, criminally underseen, I think. Over the years, whenever I've asked anybody if they've seen Judgment Night, I usually get a response of, what are you on about? But this is so good. It's about a group of guys who are on their way to a boxing match, but their car crashes in a really rough neighbourhood. Well, it's not really a car, it's more like a giant kind of mobile unit. I don't know how best to describe it, but they end up witnessing a gangland murder, and this gang decide, can't be any witnesses, so we're going to have to kill the people who were in that car crash just down the street as well. So what we end up getting is this night-long chase across LA. The whole film takes place over the course of one evening, and the protagonists have got to go past low-rent apartment blocks, abandoned train tracks, and I was so on the edge of my seat watching this because of the fact that there's 4 good guys. I thought to myself, well, probably not all of them are going to make it to the end, so you constantly think that bad things are going to happen, and it's so exciting. Emilio Estevez plays one of the good guys. Dennis Leary, I think in one of his first ever film roles, plays the main villain, and he's so good as a villain. He can do this really fast-talking thing in real life because he was a comedian, I think, first and foremost, and they make use of that in the movie. He is so watchable. Peter Green plays a pretty good villain as well. It's just an awesome film. I'm definitely going to buy this on Blu-ray before I do my top 100 grand final, because I'd like to rewatch it again just to properly decide whereabouts in that top 100 I'm going to put it. But for now, Let's find out which even more amazing film managed to beat it into the top spot for 1993. Carlito. Hey, Carlito's doing one of his trick shots. This movie is an absolute Bobby Dazzler. It's one of the best gangster films I've ever seen. Not Robert De Niro. Al Pacino plays this guy who gets out of prison after a 5-year stretch. He wants to go straight, but his old friends and associates sort of rope him back into criminal activities. There's this character played by Sean Penn. His name's Davy Kleinfeld. He's got this massive sort of ginger afro. He's such a slimy character, but he's so funny. It's really good film in terms of its soundtrack. It's got a great end chase through Grand Central Station. And like the very best gangster films, I think, the villains are sort of faceless. You never really know who they are. They could be anybody at any time, and that's what makes this film so exciting. And it's got a really sad ending as well. So yeah, Carlito's Way, for me, is the best film that came out in 1993. I love the Benny Blanco character as well. I'm Benny Blanco from the Bronx. It's just unbelievable. Right, let's find out which films I have still not seen that came out in 93, but I would quite like to. So I've written down here a film called Trauma, which is a Dario Argento film. Now, I'm currently in the middle of a Dario Argento review series, so eventually I will get to Trauma, but probably not this year. It'll be sometime next year, I imagine. And the other two films I've written down are Tombstone and The Firm, both very famous films I would absolutely want to see. I don't know why I've just never got around to these particular two. I love Westerns, so it would make sense for me to watch Tombstone. I'm sure I would enjoy it. The Firm, yeah, Tom Cruise in a legal drama. He's very good in A Few Good Men. So there's no reason why I wouldn't also really enjoy The Firm. I'm going to have to get onto that at some point. Right, that's it for today. I'll be back soon with the rankings for 1994. Until next time, cheerio.